wire up. All right, hi everybody, and welcome to the second day of AAC in the Cloud. Really excited to have you all back. All right, hi everybody, and welcome to. Very excited for the content that we have today, especially for our first session here with Jane Farrall. Before I hand it over to Jane, just a couple bookkeeping things for us to make sure and keep an eye on. For those who are joining us for the first time today, all of the video streams are found from the links on the conference schedule, so you can click those and then you'll be able to watch the video. If you watch it on the pages that are part of the website, then towards the end of the session, you'll see a link show up for a survey. You can fill out that survey and then at the end, you can generate a certificate of participation with all the credit hours for all the videos that you've watched. You don't have to watch them live. If you want to watch them after the fact or the next couple days, any of that's fine, and it'll still collect all of your participation in activity. Just use the same email address for every time you fill out the survey for different sessions. If you have any issues with that, feel free to let us know in Slack in our chat rooms, and we will help you figure it out. Every once in a while, things get a little hiccupy, but we'll get it sorted. And don't stress, because we can definitely help make it happen. If you don't see the survey links on the pages, we'll also post them in the Slack channels. There's a little thumbtack icon in each of the tracks, and it has links to all of the sessions surveys that have happened recently. So don't stress, we'll get it all figured out, we'll get it all sorted. Technology is our friend and also sometimes quite a bother, but we can all make it happen. As far as activities as we go, once again, we're still keeping an eye out for movie quotes from Back to the Future. You can win a prize for those. We've also posted a coloring page. If you upload a colored version of that coloring page to our Facebook page for AAC in the Cloud, then we'll enter you in a drawing for a gift card as well. So we should have some fun. Feel free to participate in the Slacks. This session is going to be in track 1. Of our Slack channel. So feel free to hop over there and say hello and participate. And now I will pass the baton over to our dear friend, Jane Farrall.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. For me, it's very much first thing in the morning. It's just after midnight, and it's fabulous to be here. So today we're going to be talking about shared reading, and shared reading is, as I've said recently, fundamental to AAC and literacy. Always, I just want to thank the same people who have taught me heaps about literacy and about doing literacy with individuals with complex communication needs. I'll probably use the word students quite a lot today because I mostly work in schools. So students, any age, that's what I'm referring to. So thanks to those people, particularly Karen Erickson, David Koppenhaver and Sally Clendon, and all of the students I've worked with. So shared reading is an activity that is kind of similar to the bedtime story experiences that lots of kids have. You can do it individually, you can do it in a group, and we absolutely want books to be read again and again. And the important part of shared reading is the rich interaction. So it's the rich interaction that is critical for developing a whole bunch of skills around language and an understanding of how books work. And so that interaction is what we know has that big impact. It increases kids' or students' knowledge about the world, and it increases their language learning. We also know that it works on other skills. So frequent shared book reading has been shown to increase vocabulary. We use a far more diverse range of words in print than we use in speech. It's been shown to develop joint attention, help develop joint attention. Babies who have books read to them regularly develop joint attention on earlier than babies who don't have books read to them regularly. It encourages the kids to engage with pictures. It seems to help them understand 2D pictures earlier than kids, again, who don't have books regularly read to them. And it has a big impact on oral language skills and, you know, early literacy skills, that other part. Those of you who've heard me or other people in the AAC world talk about shared reading have heard the acronym CAR, which stands for Comment, Ask, Respond. I've started not using CAR in the last year or so, and instead I think about the phrases that people use in the shared reading research. So in the shared reading research, they talk about, again, there's 3 parts to shared reading, but instead of calling the first part a comment, it's often called an attention getter, and I much prefer that phrase. And then instead of asking a question, we invite participation. We want the focus to be on that interaction. And it's not just about asking questions, it is about inviting participation. And then we still respond. So I'm using the acronym AIR now. So that's my little slide about driving the car into the air. We're really going to talk through using those phrases. And so we share the air when we read. We use the attention getter to get the learners or the students' attention. When parents are reading to young babies, they do great attention getters. They get excited over pages, they use props, they talk, and they bring the learner's attention to the book repeatedly through the book reading. When we are doing shared reading with anyone who is very emergent at any age, we absolutely need to be doing those attention getters. Then we invite participation. We want them to know that this is about interaction. It's not just about me reading the book, it's about us having an exchange. For very early literacy learners or students who are still receptive communicators, where we're putting the language in but not yet getting much language back out, we often ask simple questions, and I'm going to talk about the research around these different language levels from Vanderwood and colleagues. What we do is, if they don't give us a response, we model a response. But if we can, we attribute meaning to something they do that can be taken as a response. And so we have those 3 parts. So during shared reading, I think I've said all of this already. We attract their attention, we invite participation. And what's really important is that we have some really nice information showing that those things that we do to invite participation, we actually get more complex as the students that we're reading with develop more language. And so we use their language as a guide for those questions or those invitations to participate. So I know not everybody in the world knows The Very Hungry Caterpillar, but I would say it's a book that lots and lots of people know. So I'm going to use this book as the reference for talking about the different levels. So this table has been adapted from Vanderwood and colleagues. They have this table in the text that I've referenced below, talking about the 4 different levels of language that adults use based on the language of the child that they're reading to. So when they are reading to someone who is basically a receptive communicator, so someone who is, they call it someone who is a receptive communicator, so someone who isn't yet regularly using more formal methods of communication, adults use what they call early literal language. So asking lots of questions which are almost yes/no questions. So if we were reading The Very Hungry Caterpillar, at this level we might say, I wonder if you like apples. And then we do an expectant pause. And we look at the student, and if they are smiling, we would attribute meaning to that and say, I think you do like apples, yeah. If they are frowning, we might say, I don't think you do like apples. And if they're not giving us anything that we can see, we'll say, maybe we'll have to try apples one day and see what you think. And then that language increases. So the next level up, we're using literal language still. We're asking or inviting participation. We're doing an attention getter, but we're inviting participation with a very open-ended question. So it might be, what fruit do you think the caterpillar will eat next? And then the student responds. Now, it doesn't matter if they respond and say table. We say, oh yeah, he could eat a table. Let's turn the page and have a look. If they say a food, fabulous. If they say a fruit, because we're in the fruit section of the Very Hungry Caterpillar, awesome. Next level up, we're still asking a literal question. We're using literal language to ask the question. We're now asking a question that is something that has a more definite answer based on the context of what's happening in the book. So it could be something like, I wonder what the caterpillar is doing here. And we would expect that students at this level are giving us an answer that's pretty close to the context. And then at the fourth level, we're moving into inferential language. So now we're asking questions that require the student to use their world knowledge to answer the question. The answer is not on the page right in front of them. So with the inferential questions, it might be something like, where do you think a caterpillar would get this food from? Or where would we get this food from? And so now we're using our world knowledge to participate. Okay, AAC. Very important part of this. What we know about shared reading is it helps build students' vocabulary and language and all the things I talked about earlier. If we want the student to build that, we need to be using their language, particularly at the early levels. So back on that table, I've highlighted words in red that I would be modelling if I was doing those attention getters, invite participations at those levels. So general rule of thumb I use is we model 1 to 2 more words than the student is using. So for a receptive communicator, I'm modelling 1 word for each of the turns that I take, maybe 2. For the next level up, I'm modelling 2, 3 words for each turn that I take. Okay, so talking about level 1, this is where we are doing shared reading with an early receptive communicator. We're often using a simple text as well, but not always. We work with a very diverse range of people, and sometimes I work with teens who, while they might be a receptive communicator and an early literacy learner, have a really strong interest in a non-fiction area where we can, read a much meatier text. So it does vary. So we're going to read a book. We're going to do an attention getter, invite participation. We attribute meaning if possible. So I talked about that a little bit earlier. If the learner or the student does something that looks like they're smiling, I'll attribute meaning that that's a like response or a yes response. We know that attributing meaning is a really important strategy that we do. Caroline Musselwhite has a fabulous video, if you Google it, about attributing meaning, where she talks about why we do it. But basically, it's something that we do that teaches the learners, the students, to be less random. When we respond to their smile, we're teaching them that that's a behaviour that we like and that we can work with and we want to see. It builds their cognitive understandings. It helps them make the connection that when they do this thing, we respond to it in a particular way. And it really sends a message of competence and high expectations. I was working with a student yesterday who was doing some writing, and he is an early emergent literacy learner, and he was writing the word happy, and he was pointing to letters on an alphabet chart, and the last letter he pointed to was a Y, and myself and his the staff member who normally works with him both went, "Whoa, yes, great, Y." It may have been deliberate or it may have been accidental, but we're absolutely telling him that we believe he's a writer and we know that he will succeed. So let's use a book as an example, Whose Nose by Jeanette Rowe. So we're on the first page and I'm going to do an attention getter to bring the students' attention to the book. Then I'm going to invite participation. Then I'm going to respond generally at this level by attributing meaning to what they do. And if they didn't do something, I would model a response. So I'm going to use pod as my example at this point. So the student says, I say to the student, look. So I'm doing my attention getter. I'm doing the oink oink. I may have a little puppet there with me, but yep, I've got my little oink oink, got their attention. And now I say, more to say, I'm asking you a question. You need to tell me yes or no. Animals, farm animals, pig. Do you think it's pig's nose? And then I wait. Now, I've got their attention. I'm talking to them with their AAC system. And now I'm going to attribute meaning to something they do. So if they smile, if they make a pig noise, if they do something that looks like they're shaking their head or a dislike response, then I'm going to attribute meaning to it. And then I say, let's have a look and turn the page. We both think it's pig's nose. It is pig's nose, yay! Whose nose? Elephant's nose. Whose nose? Oh, this is a tricky one. I don't know whose nose it is. More to say. I'm asking a question. You can tell me yes or no. Animals. Turn the page. Dog. I think it's dog's nose. Let's have a look. Woof, woof. Or could be dog's nose. What do you think? Again, I attribute meaning if it's possible to. I model a response if I don't get something from them. You don't think it's dog's nose. Let's have a look. Oh, you were right. It's mouse's nose. Wow. Let's keep reading. Whose nose? Rhino's nose. Whose nose? At this point I might do a snap, snap. Crocodile's nose. Back on my AAC. So my attention getter here is, I forgot to put a circle around it on the pod page. More to say. I think it's, I'm going to go to don't like words. It's scary. Do you think it's scary? I'll do a bit of a snap, snap. Attribute meaning. Now the kid might laugh when I'm doing the snap, snap crocodile. I can totally attribute meaning to that and say, I don't think you think it's scary. I think you think it's funny. And off we go. Okay, I'm very aware of time because I've put far too much content in this presentation. So I'm going to flip ahead and not read you the rest of the book. Remember to follow the student's lead. I had obviously planned where I was going to stop in that book, but if I turned a page to one of those pictures and the student's face lit up, that's where I would stop and do air. I keep it low pressure. It's not about testing. Where possible, I relate it to what the student knows. So on the dog page, I might have said, you've got a dog at home. I do lots of attributing meaning, and if I have other adults around, I can use them to model. So I've done a little poster, and this is in the handouts that you can download. This is just about level 1. So with level 1 students, we are doing Share the Air. We are doing lots of great attention getters. We're bringing their attention to the book. Students at level 1 are not necessarily engaging with the whole book. Our job is to get their attention to the book regularly while we are reading. We invite participation, we do the response. How often do we do that? Depends on the student, depends on the book, but use air as much as you can. I know there's research saying that doing it on every page with rich interaction is best outcomes. But that's not something that we would normally do, particularly with students at level 1. When you look at parents reading books with babies, they might do it 4 or 5 times during the book. They're not doing it on every single page. For the students that we work with, you're making that decision all of the time, but do it as much as you can. Books you should use, the main rules are book that you can read in one sitting and a book that they are interested and will engage with. So if I know a student's really interested in spiders, I'll have a spider book in the selection, or maybe more than one. Lots of the older students that I work with who may still be very emergent and at level 1 and still receptive communicators much prefer non-fiction books. Don't get stuck in the trap that early readers only like fiction. We often read only fiction with our very young children who are just learning about literacy, but our older students can have a much more diverse range of interests, and many of them will engage more with non-fiction. One thing I found lots of students engage with a lot who are just learning about books and how they work is books about them. So I will make little custom books about them with photos of them through them, and that's been a great sort of book to get them engaged. Okay, so next level up, we're still using literal language, but now the student's an early expressive communicator and we're asking open-ended questions. So we're going to read a different book. You're going to get lots of Australian books today. I'm not going to apologise for that. Our books are awesome. So Edward the Emu. Edward the Emu was sick of the zoo. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing to do. And compared to the seals that lived right next door, well, being an emu was frankly a bore. So I'm not going to model in a specific AAC system. I can do obviously any of these levels with any good, robust AAC system. So my attention getter might be, oh dear, he looks bored. And then my invite participation would be, how do you feel at the zoo? And then the student would respond. Now, if I'm using a AAC system like Proloquo to Go perhaps, with a student at this level, I might navigate to the feelings section and then they can respond. I might just stay on the home page and see where they go. If the student says dog, I might say, oh, I wonder if we would see a dog at the zoo. Or, oh, do you think he looks sad like your dog? So I'm going to respond to that and I'm going to attribute meaning to it, and I'm going to teach them that they are competent and participate in this interaction. If the student says sad, I can say, oh, I've been sad at the zoo sometimes. It gets so exhausting. On with the book. So that night when the zookeeper went home to bed, Edward jumped from his pen and he laughed as he said, the seals are best anybody can tell, so tomorrow I'll just be a seal as well. The next morning at 9 when they opened the zoo, the seals were swimming and Edward was too. He dived in the water and basked in the sun, and he balanced a ball on his beak just for fun. Well, Edward was really enjoying the day till he overheard someone behind the fence say, the seals are always amusing, it's true, but the lion's the best thing to see at the zoo. Oh, I think he might do something different. Which animal do you think he will be next? And then the student responds. If the student says lion, I'd say, oh yeah, I reckon he could be a lion. If the student says stop, I could say, oh, he might stop pretending and go back to being an emu. Or I might say, oh, do you think he's going to stop being a seal and be something else? I think he might. So that night when the zookeeper went home to bed, Edward jumped from the pool and he smiled as he said, the lion's the best anybody can tell, so tomorrow I'll just be a lion as well. The next morning at 9 when they opened the zoo, the lions were roaring and Edward was too. He snarled at the ladies and growled at the men. Life was certainly grand for a lion in his den. Well, Edward was having a wonderful day till the man in the crowd had the gumption to say, "The lion's a beast I shall always detest, the snakes are the things that I like to see best." So that night when the zookeeper went home to bed, Edward crept from the cage and he grinned as he said, "If the snakes are the best things and that's what they say, then tomorrow I'll just be a snake for the day." The next morning at 9, when they opened the zoo, the snakes were all hissing and Edward was too. He slipped round the rocks. It was magic to see. Then he curled himself casually up round a tree. Yuck. I do not like snakes. Ugh. Attention getter. What do you think of snakes? And then the student can respond. Now, if the student goes somewhere completely tangential and says rough, I'd say, I felt a snake once and I think it was smooth, but I guess some snakes could be rough. I wonder. And if the student says love, I say, oh, you love snakes, you're brave. So again, whatever their response, we take it, we let them know that they're participating, and we assume competence at all times. Well, Edward was just warming up for the day when he overheard one of the visitors say, "The snakes are impressive, I know that it's true, but the emu's by far the best thing at the zoo." "The emu," gasped Edward. "My goodness, that's me. I'm the thing that the gentleman most likes to see. Not the seals, the lions, the snakes and the rest. It's Edward the emu he likes to see best." So that night when the zookeeper went home to bed, Edward slipped from the cage and he laughed as he said, "If the emu's the best, then that's easy then. Tomorrow I'm Edward the emu again." Edward ran to the place where he used to reside, but oh, what a shock when he clambered inside. He found himself suddenly come face to face with the emu they'd brought to take Edward's place. The emus considered each other a while. Then the new emu said with a shy little smile, "Hello, I'm Edwina. It's nice meeting you. You're the best I've seen since I came to the zoo." Yay, he's got a friend. And then our invitation, I wonder if he's happy about that. Expectant pause. Student responds. If the student says funny, I might say, "Yeah, it is funny. They look the same." Or, "Yes, it is funny. There's a new emu." And if the student says happy, I think he'd be happy too. All right, next level up. I might have to skip bits of the books as we go. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. Okay, so next level up, we're still using literal language, but now we're asking questions that have a more definite response. Students at this level would generally be responding on the topic. Okay, so this is a Dreamtime story. So the Aboriginal Australians, who are the traditional owners of the land that I live on, have a period that they call Dreamtime and stories that they use to explain many things in our world. So how the birds got their colours is one of the Dreamtime stories. In the beginning, all birds were black. One day, a dove was trying to catch a grub. Oh, and this book is from Tar Heel Reader. So in the handout, you'll see this is the only book that I've been able to put in the handout. He didn't catch the grub. He landed on a sharp stick. The stick hurt his foot. Oh, no. Invite participation. That must hurt. Big expectant pause. Now, at this stage, as I've said, we would have more of an expectation of a response close to the topic, but it still isn't about testing. So you're not saying you're not asking a question and giving the student feedback about it being right and wrong. If they give an answer that's off the topic, we still follow their lead and turn it around so that we can model an on-topic response. He was very sick. He was dying. His friends came to see him. They wanted to help. The crow didn't come to help. The parrot cut open his foot with her beak. Wow, what was she trying to do? Now, when I was putting this presentation together, I was thinking about this. Is this actually the next level up? Are they having to use their world knowledge to answer it? So maybe a little bit of a borderline question, but again, we would want to see some sort of response that was on topic, and the basic response would be help. His foot burst open. The birds were covered in colour from his foot. Some birds were red, some birds were blue, some birds were yellow, some birds were green. All the birds who tried to help were now coloured. They look great. What coloured birds have you seen? Now, again, you could think that's a world knowledge question, but we've actually just seen pages of coloured birds. So we can totally talk about that. The information about that is in the book. The crow didn't try to help. The crow stayed black. That is the story of how the birds got their colours. Now, I've only put air in about 3 times in this book. I would obviously try and stop more. One of the biggest things I find in the classroom is the amount of time we have, and particularly when we're using AAC to do that 3-part interaction, it can take a lot of time. So sometimes there's a book where if I had more time, I would stop more frequently, but at this stage, I'm stopping not quite as frequently. Okay, and then we go up to the 4th level where we're using inferential language. So this is where we're asking questions that they definitely need their world knowledge to answer. And I've picked a non-fiction book here. This one comes from Reading A to Z, which is an online leveled book product. So airplanes are amazing machines. People use airplanes to get things. Now, I could totally stop on this page and talk about the train being loaded on the plane. Whenever I have read this book with students, they have found that really fascinating. So instead, I'm going to do, that's cool. I wonder if there's something you can think of that might have come on a plane. So now I'm trying to get them to use their world knowledge. They've seen a couple of examples on the page before, but I want them to think more widely about things that might have come on a plane. People use airplanes to go places. People use airplanes to put out fires. Wow, that's good. What else do people use to put out fires? Now, that would have been very topical here in Australia earlier in the year, and the kids would have been seeing heaps of footage. We had some really out of control bushfires that burned for a very long time. And I know that those of you in other countries, both in Europe and North America, have had that experience recently too. And so that's something that a lot of kids may have some world knowledge about. Okay, people use airplanes to help grow food. People use airplanes to do tricks. People use airplanes to have fun. Oh, they jumped out of the plane. Why do you think they did that? Now, the book has actually said to have fun. So the student could answer that with their knowledge from the book. At this level, we can turn this into a much longer discussion. We can go off on a whole side discussion. So if the student simply says to have fun, I can then model, oh, I think they were doing it to scare themselves. And we can go off and have a whole extra discussion about it. It doesn't have to just be the basic 3 parts of air. You might go through the invite participation, respond 3 or 4 times in a cycle at this level. People use airplanes in many ways. Okay, so having talked about those different language levels, the next part I want to talk about is some of the different things that the research tells us people do during shared reading. And I've called these the Great 8. And what I've done is an equivalent table of the activities I would do with the students at the different 4 levels. So a student who is a receptive communicator, I am mostly just sharing the air with them at that very simple level. And then I'm going to start talking about just the letters in their name generally. I can talk about any letters as we read the book, but I'd definitely be talking about the letters in their name with students at this level. Next level up, I diversify the range of things that I do. I'm going to add in crowd. I'm going to explicitly model I have a question, although you can do that at any level. I'm going to stop and teach vocabulary as we come across words they might not know. And I'm going to be asking them to take a turn. Do you have a question? And next level up, I add in print referencing and talking about rhymes and sounds. And I continue that with level 4. So we've already talked about sharing the air. I'm just going to move on. Link to letters, we talk about strategic letters. So if I'm working with a student, as I said, at level 1, a lot of this would focus on the letters in their name. For students who are further along, it might be, if you're using the explicit alphabet teaching routine and you've got a letter of the day, you might talk about the letter of the day. If you're doing a few letters of the week, you might talk about those letters as you read the book. This is my very short video of doing this. Let's have a look at the next page. My granddad helps me make things, and we've got another K for Clara in make. Okay, that easy. The next one of the grade 8 is crowd, and we use crowd to invite participation. So I think a lot of you will have heard about crowd. It's from an area of research called dialogic reading, where people have researched the dialogue that happens during shared reading. So the 5 parts of crowd, there's completion. So if you're reading a book with a repeated line, you pause and get the learner to finish it. Now, this is something that we can store the repeated line or the end of the repeated line in the individual's AAC system, or we can use a separate tool like a Big Mac or a step-by-step, or the Smooth Talker AAC app is actually free at the moment. That's a great way to turn an iPad into a single talking switch. So I can record the repeated line in that app, and then as we get to it in the book, the student can touch the iPad screen and add in the repeated line. It's really important with completion that if we're setting it up to happen with their AAC system, that it's in front of them the whole time. So crowd is something, completion rather, is something that we do with kids to kind of learn how much they know about how the book is structured. We only do it with a really familiar book. You're not going to pull out a book for the first time and get the kid to fill in the repeated line. But if we're back to talking about the very hungry caterpillar, it's got that beautiful repeated line in it, but he was still hungry. I can record that, and as we read the book, I can do a really good expectant pause to let the student know that I'm expecting them to press it, and then fade that expectant pause as we go. What I want to do with completion is I want the student to be listening to the story and anticipating when that line comes. I've often seen people do completion where they push the switch in front of the student as they want them to say the line, and then they pull the switch away. What the student's actually learning there is to press the switch when it's in front of them. What we want them to learn is they stay off the switch, we get to the right part in the story, and then they press it. And that staying off the switch is just as important as learning to press it at the right time. When we read a book, a line happens at a specific time, and that timing is really important. Okay, the next part of crowd is recall. So if we were reading The Very Hungry Caterpillar, I might say, oh, what fruit has the caterpillar already eaten? Open-ended, we've already talked about open-ended questions. So lots of pages on lots of books lead to open-ended questions. WH questions. I always say that this is in there to remind us not to ask too many. We can really have a habit of turning shared reading into a bit of a test or a bit of a question fest. We really just want to invite participation. You'll notice that some of my examples, there was no WH at all. I was simply saying, I wonder what's going to happen next. Big expectant pause. And so make sure that you keep your WH questions down. And then distancing is about relating the book to the learner's life. So in distancing, we are saying things like, oh, he's just eaten strawberries. You had strawberries yesterday. And so we're, or we're reading Whose Knows back at the beginning and we get to the dog. Oh, you've got a dog at home. So that's distancing. Okay, model I have a question. So this comes from the Centre for Literacy and Disability Studies as a suggestion from their project core. I work with some students who use POD. I work with students who use core vocabulary. One of the things I've noticed was that students who use POD often seem to have a better understanding of functions of speech earlier on. Not always, but sometimes. They brought up a really good point that sometimes students don't even know that we're asking a question. And so they are encouraging people to model the phrase, oh, I've got a question for you, quite frequently. So back at Whose Knows, I was saying more to say, I'm asking a question, you can tell me yes or no, and then I'd go off to animals and say, do you think it's a pig? So that's kind of built in there. Have a think about doing that with other AAC systems, just as a flag that this is something I'm doing where I'm requiring a spot response to help students key in more to questions. We've been doing it at one of the schools that I work with that uses core vocabulary. They do have some students that use POD, but they have a large number of students that use core vocabulary, and Prologue Quote to Go is a really common system there. So they're just using one of the question cells on the homepage of Prologue Quote to Go, or going down to the questions folder and just pressing the question button. And they've been doing it now, well, with coronavirus, put a gap in what they were doing, but they've been doing it now for several weeks, and they've already noticed that some of the students who were consistently struggling with questions in conversations are finding them much easier now and much more aware that a question is actually being asked. Okay, we build vocabulary instruction into shared reading. So what we do with words as we come across them is we talk about the word. We might use a synonym for it. We briefly define it. And AAC is a fabulous tool to do that with. There's lots of information online about descriptive vocabulary teaching. Gail Van Tatenhove has got presentations about this and how it relates to AAC. What we know, so if we're reading a book and, for example, I was reading a book the other day about a duck that was stuck in the muck. Muck is not a word that we would use much in everyday communication. What we want to do is make sure that the student understands it. And so we absolutely know we're not going to have every word in English in any AAC system really, unless we're using text-to-speech. But what we're going to do is we're going to teach the student about that word by describing it. So I might go into my other vocabulary. I might go, say, to descriptions, and then say dirty is another word for muck, or mud is another word for muck. It also gives us a chance to model that strategic competence skill. So in Light's definition towards communication competence, she talks about strategic competence, and strategic competence is that ability to come up with alternative ways to say a word that's not in your system, or to make the best use of the vocab that you've got. So when we model strategic competence to teach vocabulary, we're not just modeling modelling the vocabulary, we're also teaching that important skill of strategic competence. So there's a very popular picture book here called Piranhas Don't Like Bananas. And I'm spending a lot of time in classrooms explaining to kids that a piranha is a scary fish. And so I've also said it's a bit like a shark, which it isn't really, but I guess in terms of it being scary and perhaps eating people, it's a bit like a shark. But yeah, so I've generally stuck with the definition that a piranha is a scary fish. It's not in any student's AAC system so far, but it is becoming a very favourite book, so we might be adding it. Okay, do you have a question? Again, this was a great point from the Centre for Literacy and Disability Studies. When we do shared reading with kids, as their language develops, they often take over and run the shared reading instead of us running it. We don't see that happen as frequently as we should with kids who use AAC. We do see it, but it should be happening more frequently. And so if we deliberately say to ourselves, right, I'm going to promote this happening by telling them today in shared reading, you're going to ask the questions. It's your job. And then as we read the book, we do a big expectant pause and look at them. If needed, I'll have a third party. If I've got a third person to participate, I can set them up to model asking the questions. I'm using lots of expectant pauses as my cue. Of course, I'm always reading their body language, and sometimes students are initiating in a less formal way. So they're initiating, you know, we're all multimodal communicators. They're initiating by leaning towards the book. That's a great chance for me to specifically say, do you have a question you want to ask, or do you want to say something? And then, of course, as part of shared reading, we are doing print referencing. So print referencing is about teaching kids how books work as we read the books. So here's one definition of it. It's about getting emergent readers interested in print by highlighting the forms, functions and features of print during read alouds. And so that is exactly what we're doing. Now, print referencing is something I've put under levels 3 and 4. You can do it with earlier kids, but I definitely wouldn't be spending a lot of time with a student who's at level 1 of shared reading talking about print referencing. When I've got a student where I am trying to repeatedly bring their attention to the book and just create engagement with reading, the last thing I want to be saying is, and now the text is going to go down the page, and this is the author. I really, with those kids, I just want to make it as fun and engaging and interactive as possible. But as students progress, we definitely want to be doing print referencing to teach them really explicitly about how books work. They need to know, for example, that print goes down a page, that we read it from left to right. Marie Clay, who developed reading recovery, which possibly not everybody is familiar with, but she was an amazing New Zealand literacy person. Marie Clay talked about with emergent kids, you know, she was talking about kids who are 3 and 4, point as you read to show them that print goes from left to right. We wouldn't encourage them to point because later on that can become a real problem. But for us, pointing, some of the students I work with, I'm pointing with a little squeeze torch rather than with my finger. But I do that quite a bit because that knowledge of how print is organised is really important. We also want them to learn later skills. So as students progress towards being conventional readers and writers, they need to know that there is one written word for each spoken word, for example. They need to totally understand that letters and words make up print. They need to understand that terminology. They need to know the word letter. They need to know the word write. They need to know about environmental print, and that's often included in the pictures in books that we read. They need to know that non-fiction may have a chapter list at the beginning, or it may have a glossary at the back. They need to know all of those different features and all of those different types of print as they move closer and closer to being conventional. And of course, they will continue to learn them once they are conventional, but it's very hard to move. Oh, yes, I just saw a comment pop up in the Slack window. Yes, in some languages, print does go from right to left rather than left to right. Okay, so how do we do print referencing and which books should we use? So basically we do it as part of our shared reading. Now, the shared reading research suggests that 3+ books a day makes the difference. So we aren't just doing shared reading once a day. We are reading books repeatedly, but we're doing it more than once a day. And so Zuckerward and Justice suggests that one of those readings would be something where you are doing print referencing. And you can do it with anything. Lots of children's picture books have text dotted all over the page. That's a really good chance to talk about, let's find the writing. Let's see where the writing is. Who can spot it first? If you do it with poetry, you can talk about how poetry is often constructed in a solid chunk. You can do it with non-fiction. And of course, you do it with any print that happens to be in the pictures in the books that you're reading as well. So back to the airplanes book, we could be talking about we could be talking about the labels that are on the sides of the planes. So anything that you can do to show them that print is there and it appears in lots of places and we get information from it wherever it is great. I've done a little handout, and this is in your group of handouts for this session, of suggestions of things that you can do. So if we've got print on both pages as a book is open, we can talk about we read the left side first in English, not in all languages. We definitely want to talk about the title of the book. As we read, we can use our finger and point to teach students that we go from left to right, we go from top to bottom. And again, I know that's not all languages, but whatever direction your language goes in, you want to be showing them that. We talk about the author and the illustrator. So the book that I was talking about, Piranhas Don't Like Bananas, is by the same author as a book called Pig the Pug, which is also really popular. And so I might say to them, oh, we're going to read a new book and it's by one of your favourite authors. It's by the guy who wrote Pig the Pug. Woo! I talk about the front cover and the back cover. This is where the book begins. This is where the book ends. We call it the front cover. We need to teach students that metalinguistics, the labels for all of these things in literacy. Concept of word, we might count the words on a page. We might count the words in a picture. We talk about things like which words are shorter and which words are longer. We, at this level, we're also, so this is our students at level 3, we're also talking about punctuation. Oh, there's an exclamation mark, it must be exciting. Lots of picture books use uppercase to emphasize something. They might use italics to emphasize something. So any of those things are things that we can talk about in shared reading, print referencing. Okay, and then the final of the grade 8 is talking about rhymes and sounds. So you can do this again with students at any level, but you definitely want to be doing it with your students at levels 3 and 4. We know that many students with complex communication needs need as much practice as they can get to improve their phonemic awareness, their ability to hear sounds in words. So we can, lots and lots of children's picture books have rhyming in them, and we would absolutely be pointing out rhyming words. Alliteration is when the initial letters sound the same. So one of my colleagues, friends from the UK, sent me a book called We Went to the Supermarket, and this is Rosie Clark, the lovely Rosie. it's got all sorts of things that you might eat, including crazy crisps. And so the initial sounds are the same in both of those words. You then want to talk about that concept using your AAC. So if you are using a pod on the alphabet page, there's two cells. One says begins with and one says end sound. Or end of word. And so I will talk about the beginning of the sound, the beginning sound of the word and the end sound of the word using those cells. In another system, in core vocabulary, I will talk about beginning and end. And sometimes we're talking about the middle sounds as well. Okay, so that is the Share the Air Grade 8. And so we are doing not all of those with every student at every level, but we do want to make sure that as students move into being conventional readers, that we have covered all of those 8 things. The other thing I wanted to talk about is keeping records. So as I said, research says 3+ a day is important. So if you are in a classroom team and different staff are reading with students, you really want to keep a record of the fact that everybody's had an opportunity to participate in shared reading. I had a meeting earlier today with the leadership team from Red Hill Special School here in Australia, and they actually have an internal competition. The principal, the deputy principal and the head of curriculum are keeping a weekly log of which students they read books to, and every week they publish a graph of which of them in the admin team read the most books to the most students, and they have a little bit of a I read more than you moment. So for them, they're keeping their records for their own skills and knowledge. But for us, we want to make sure that we keep records of how often we're doing shared reading and that we are covering the appropriate areas of the grade 8. So you can just do a traditional reading log where you're writing which book was read on what day. I often include columns about engagement with early students. I have a lot of forms with 3 columns of engagement. Or this is what we're using at lots of the schools that I work with. So this is a little form that we print. We actually print them up as booklets and we have 1 per student. And so each time we read with a student, we put in their name, who we are and the date. And then we tick off which of the grade 8 that we have covered. We also keep a record of how frequently the student communicated during the shared reading. And then that's the 3-level engagement scale that I talked about. So particularly with the level 1 students, we can get an idea of which books they're attending to more, which they're engaged with more, and just as importantly, as that behaviour increases. So generally, as we begin doing shared reading with students, they engage with books more and more. They learn how fun and cool they are, and we can use this form to track that increasing engagement. And I've put this form in the group of handouts as well. Okay, so I have amazingly managed to finish a couple of minutes early if anybody has any questions. I've put the reference list in at the end. It's been a pleasure joining you all.
Jane, thanks so much for your presentation, for all the material covered. We'll give people just a couple minutes to see if there are any questions that come up. One thing that was said earlier, Michelle said, my challenge has been working with others, paras, parents, and even some teachers that have difficulty responding to children's responses to validate them or connect them to the text. The feedback I've had is it can be challenging for them. One person told me, I don't think fast like you do, or I don't know what to say. Partners need time seeing you model this and even role play.
Absolutely. And the schools I work with, we do practice this quite a lot in staff meetings. Individual classrooms practice it in their co-teaching meetings. the other thing I would say is if you're just getting started, I know we follow the student's lead, but for me, when I was starting to think about shared reading like this and thinking about level 4 students, I found coming up with inferential questions for level 4 students very challenging. I put post-it notes through the book. And so putting post-it notes through the book gave me a little prop or support that helped me be more successful. Lots of the staff that I work with do that as well now. Some people who are not as familiar with the students' AAC system don't just put what their invite participation might be, they also put the pathway to find the language that they need. And so that's helped people. And then using the post-it notes. So again, sometimes when I'm working with a team where perhaps one of the people in the team keeps trying to turn it into testing rather than interaction, I put the post-it notes in for them as a reminder of what they should be saying. And so I've used that post-it note trick, which originally for me was my crutch, in different ways to help people get more familiar and to really be doing appropriate shared reading.
Awesome, thank you. One other question, can you do shared reading for a whole class, or is it more of a one-on-one sort of a thing?
I would say it does depend, but I do it all the time with whole classes. A lot of the classes I work with are small numbers though, so anything up to 11 students in a class. I also work with a lot of classes where students are, really across all 4 levels of shared reading. So there I might be picking lots of level 2 and maybe some occasional level 3 questions when I'm doing it with the group. And then when I'm doing it one-to-one, I'm focusing on the appropriate level for the student. But yeah, you can absolutely do shared reading with a group.
Awesome. Okay, well, we'll wrap up then. Thank you again, Jane, so much for doing this. I think it's been a great help for people. And I think this is a resource that I'm personally going to be using, sending to some people. So thanks for putting this together for us all.
My pleasure. And I apologise for not staying on, but it's now 1:30 in the morning and I'm going to bed, and I will catch up with the sessions from today at another time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks again so much for coming in at a little bit of an awkward time, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Okay, thanks a lot. Enjoy the day, guys.
Thank you.